My parents called me a useless failure and kicked me out, then expected me to help them later. My name is Lauren. I'm 27 years old. And when I was 19, my parents called me a useless failure, told me to get out, and acted like throwing me away was somehow supposed to help me grow up. Even now, years later, I still remember the exact look on my father's face when he said it. He wasn't angry in the loud, dramatic way people expect. He looked cold, tired, and completely convinced that he was doing the right thing. That was somehow worse. I grew up in a house where love always felt conditional. My older brother, Evan, was the favorite from the beginning, and nobody even bothered pretending otherwise. He was outgoing, athletic, and naturally charming. He could forget birthdays, leave messes everywhere, and talk back to my parents, and somehow they still found a way to spin it into confidence or leadership. If I made one mistake, it became proof that I was irresponsible, lazy, or too sensitive. I was the quiet one. I liked reading, drawing, and fixing things with my hands. I was never the kind of person who knew exactly what she wanted to be at 18. I tried community college because my parents pushed me into it, but I felt lost almost immediately. I changed majors twice, not because I didn't care, but because every choice felt huge and permanent, and I was terrified of making the wrong one. At the same time, I worked part-time at a grocery store to cover my own gas, phone bill, and school supplies. None of that mattered to my parents. In their eyes, if I wasn't moving fast enough, I wasn't moving at all. My mother had a way of making every conversation feel like a performance review. She could turn, "How was work?" into a criticism about my future. My father was quieter, but his disappointment sat heavy in every room. He didn't need to yell often. A sigh, a look, or one cutting sentence from him could ruin my whole week. My parents were polite and normal around other people, which almost made things harder. Neighbors thought they were supportive and involved. Relatives thought I was lucky to have stable parents. Nobody saw what happened behind closed doors. At home, everything was comparison. Evan got praised for potential. I got judged for not proving mine fast enough. If he stumbled, my parents said he was under pressure. If I struggled, they said I lacked discipline. If he changed direction, he was finding himself. If I did it, I was wasting time. The only person in my family who ever seemed to really see me was my Aunt Denise, my mom's younger sister. She lived about 40 minutes away and worked long hours, but she always called to check in. She never treated me like I was broken just because I didn't fit my parents' idea of success. When I told her I liked helping a coworker restore old furniture on weekends, she said, "That sounds like a real skill, not a hobby." When I admitted I was thinking about trade work instead of forcing myself through a degree I hated, she told me there were 100 ways to build a life, and only insecure people believed there was just one. My mom hated when Denise said things like that. She said Denise filled my head with excuses. The summer, everything fell apart. I was 19 and trying harder than anyone gave me credit for. I had picked up extra shifts at the grocery store, and on weekends I worked with a woman named Carla, who flipped old furniture. We cleaned, repaired, sanded, painted, and resold pieces online. I loved it. I liked the patience of it, the detail, the way something worn out could become beautiful and useful again. It gave me a kind of peace I didn't feel anywhere else. When I mentioned over dinner that I might want to look into cabinetry or interior finishing, my father stared at me like I had announced I wanted to join the circus. He said, "So your life plan is arts and crafts?" Evan laughed so hard he nearly choked on his drink. My mother shook her head and said, "That's not a real future, Lauren. That's what people do when they can't handle serious work." I stopped talking for the rest of dinner. What made it worse was that Evan had recently moved back home after flunking out of college, and somehow that changed nothing for him. My parents called it a setback. They said he just needed time. They bought him his favorite snacks, gave him space, and spoke to him gently, like he was recovering from some noble battle. Meanwhile, I was paying rent to live in the same house and still being treated like a burden. Yes, they charged me rent. It wasn't enough to make me homeless, but it was enough to make saving almost impossible. I paid it because I thought maybe if I contributed, they'd finally respect me. Instead, it just gave them another thing to hold over my head. If dishes were left out, I should have noticed. If the bathroom was messy, I should have cleaned it. If Evan slept until noon, that was none of my business. I was expected to act like a fully independent adult while being treated like an incompetent child. The final shift happened after a family barbecue at my uncle's house. One of my cousins asked how school was going, and before I could answer, my mother smiled that sharp, fake smile and said, "Lauren is still figuring out who she wants to be." The table went quiet in that awkward way families do when everyone knows a comment was meant to wound. I felt my face burn, but I kept smiling because I didn't want to cry in front of everyone. On the drive home, my father said I had embarrassed them. I said, "I barely even spoke." He replied, "Exactly, because you have nothing to say for yourself." That night, I stayed in my room and tried to convince myself it would pass like every other bad week. The next day, I worked a long shift and came home late, hoping everyone would already be asleep. Instead, both of my parents were sitting at the kitchen table waiting for me, in total silence. My mother had her arms folded. My father leaned forward and said, "Sit down. We need to talk about your future." And something in his voice told me my life was about to change. I sat down at the kitchen table, still wearing my grocery store polo, my name tag, and shoes that made my feet ache. My parents looked at me like they had rehearsed the whole thing. That was the part that hurt the most at first. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment fight. It was planned. They had sat together, talked about me, and decided what to do before I even walked through the door. My father started in that calm, careful tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. He said they had been patient. He said adulthood required responsibility, direction, and discipline. He said they had tried encouragement, rules, deadlines, and letting me learn the hard way. Then he looked me right in the eye and said, "None of it has worked." I remember gripping my keys so tightly that the edges dug into my palm. I asked, "What are you talking about?" My mother answered before he could. "We're talking about the fact that you are 19 years old and still acting like life is optional." "I work," I said. "I pay rent. I help around here." She actually laughed. "You stock shelves at a grocery store and play with furniture in a garage." "It's not playing," I said. "I'm learning something." My father's face hardened. "You're drifting, Lauren. You have no serious plan, no real ambition, and no urgency." I looked at him and said, "I'm trying to figure out what fits me." He snapped, "People like you use that phrase forever." Then my mother folded her arms tighter and said the sentence I will never forget. "You are a useless failure, and we are done pretending otherwise." I just stared at her. I think part of me thought if I stayed still enough, maybe the moment would reverse itself. Maybe she'd realize how cruel it sounded. But she didn't. She looked relieved, like she had finally said something she'd been wanting to say for years. I asked, very quietly, "Did you really just call me that?" My father said, "Your mother is being blunt, but she's not wrong." That was the moment something inside me went cold. I said, "Evan failed out of school and moved back in, and you treat him like he's just finding himself. I'm working, paying rent, and actually trying, and somehow I'm the failure?" My mother's expression turned sharp. "Do not drag your brother into this." "I'm not dragging him into anything," I said. "I'm pointing out the double standard." My father slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make me jump. "The difference is that your brother still has potential. You act like a victim every time life asks something of you." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Evan was upstairs unemployed, sleeping half the day, and somehow still the family's success story. I said, "So what exactly do you want from me?" My mother answered immediately, "We want you out." I honestly thought I'd misheard her. "Out?" My father nodded. "You have until tomorrow afternoon to pack your things." I asked, "Are you serious?" He said, "Completely." I looked from one of them to the other, waiting for some sign of hesitation, some crack in the performance that would tell me this was just a threat to scare me into changing. There was nothing. They meant it. I said, "Where am I supposed to go?" My father shrugged. "You're an adult. Figure it out." Then he said the line that still wakes me up some nights. "Go live in the street if you have to. Maybe then you'll stop acting useless." I started crying right there at the table. I hate that I did, because it gave my mother exactly what she wanted. She rolled her eyes and said, "There it is, tears instead of action." I ran to my room, locked the door, and sat on the floor shaking so badly I could barely breathe. After a few minutes, I called the only person I trusted. Aunt Denise answered on the second ring. The second she heard my voice, she said, "What happened?" I choked out, "They're kicking me out." She didn't ask if I was exaggerating. She didn't question me. She just said, "Start packing. I'm on my way." I packed through tears. Clothes, sketchbooks, my laptop, the small jewelry box my grandmother gave me, and the cash I had hidden in an old shoebox because I never felt safe leaving money around. Around midnight, Evan pushed my door open without knocking and leaned against the frame like he was watching a show. He said, "You really blew it." I asked, "Did you know they were doing this?" He shrugged. "Mom said they were tired of your attitude." "And you said nothing?" He looked uncomfortable for 1 second, then covered it with a smirk. "Honestly, maybe this will be good for you." I told him to get out, and for once he actually listened. Denise arrived a little after 1 in the morning in sweatpants, a hoodie, and no patience left for anybody. She walked straight into the house, took one look at my face, and got furious. My mother stepped into the hallway and said, "There's no need to make this dramatic." Denise turned and said, "You threw your daughter out at night." The dramatic part already happened. My father tried saying it was a private family matter, and Denise replied, "Not anymore." Neither of my parents tried to stop me from leaving. Not one apology. Not one softening of their faces. At the front door, I paused, because some pathetic, hopeful part of me still thought one of them might say this had gone too far. Instead, My father said, "Maybe now you'll finally grow up." So I left. I slept on Denise's couch for 3 months. She helped me get a job at a home improvement store, and that job changed everything. I knew more than I realized about wood repair, paint, finishes, and measurements. A manager noticed, trained me further, and by the next year I was supervising a section. Later I got hired by a custom cabinetry company. I learned fast, worked hard, and slowly built a life that felt steady and mine. Then, after years of silence, my mother called me out of nowhere, not to apologize. She said my father had lost his job. Evan had moved out after a fight, and they were struggling with the mortgage. Then she told me, family helps family. I actually laughed. Now relatives are split. Some say I should be the bigger person because they're still my parents. Denise says they only remembered me when they needed something. I keep hearing my father telling me to go live in the street if I had to. So tell me honestly, was I wrong for refusing to help them after what they did? Would you have cut them off too? And if they ever apologize now, should I believe them? Share your opinion in the comments.